I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sit alone on my couch laughing. But you said, people either find it funny or devastating. And how do you reconcile that? Speak to the extreme responses.
Yeah, I think when I was writing it, it felt very urgent, and it felt very serious and very sort of life and death that I get it out, which makes it sound very dramatic. But I think the way that this protagonist is kind of surviving this intense era of her life is by being sarcastic, by using humor, right? That's actually a kind of survival tool for her to kind of get through the devastation of a complete loss of identity, feeling like she's completely abandoned herself. She doesn't know what self she is anymore. So I think it really kind of depends, where you are in your life when you come to the book. I have some readers who are in their Nightbitch era, and this book is very intense and devastating, and it's hard for them to read. And also women who are 65 and raised 5 kids, and it's still devastating and hard for them to read because they've actually never kind of confronted the loss that came along with that era in their lives. But then at this point, this book came out 3 years ago. I think it's really funny now. And I think, also the director of the film, she really leaned into the humor too. So I'm glad to see that.
Let's talk about the pandemic as if everyone wants to. Publishing, it was a strange time for publishing, but your book did really well.
Yeah, like I said, I think in some ways I was lucky, right, that I wrote a book about maternal rage when, a lot of America was just in the throes of maternal rage. And it was just kind of crazy how when it came out, there were also these articles about moms getting together in parking lots to like scream in the middle of the night. There were these moms in Pittsburgh who were like, had a, weekly scream or howl. Things were getting sort of feral. I don't know if you recall, but it was a real weird time. And I think people were open for the weirdness. I think, we had also just come off of a Trump presidency, and I think there was a lot of rage, especially among women, like this feeling of utter helplessness that this is like the president of our country, and what it felt like to be a woman in a country who had elected that sort of leader. I just think we were feeling all of that, and so I guess the book was in some ways helped by that, but it still has legs. Like, people are still reading it, and I think, when I was writing it, I told myself I never had to show it to anyone because it felt like I was being really bad when I started writing it. It felt like I was saying all the things you're not supposed to say. I was feeling ways that a good mother wouldn't feel. And so it really was, like the first third of it was just written in secret. Like, this is just a project for myself. And I think there's been a lot of relief from a lot of readers who feel brought into community by this book. Like, oh, you felt that way too. I thought I was the only one, because we had become so isolated in the pandemic, right? Like, we weren't meeting up, we weren't seeing each other, and so I think it was a way of being in community with other mothers. Like, this book kind of provided that outlet.
Did you, during the publishing process, make any discoveries about publishing that you didn't know? Or did you get a peek behind the curtain? Or,
okay, so this is one thing I discovered. Obviously, I didn't have a book tour because this came out in July of 2021, so I was doing a lot of Zoom events, a lot of interviews for print outlets. But before you're published, you sort of have this fantasy about being an author, right? That's going to be so incredible to, you know, be on a stage and talk to Kris from the Missouri Review and have people be interested in your writing process. And it was great. But at a certain point, I realized, oh, what I like about being a writer is writing. Like that is actually the joy of being a writer. And all of this other stuff isn't writing at all. You know, it has nothing to do with writing, and actually you're using a very different set of skills when you're, you know, being a public person. And so that was interesting, right? That it kind of popped that fantasy that, oh, it's going to be this, you know, this great like public life. It's like, actually, I'd like to just write now by myself with no one around.
So any advice for first-time novelists? I mean, perhaps be prepared that you have to cultivate this public self.
I mean, I think you don't have to cultivate. My advice is if you don't want to do interviews and you don't want to be a public figure, then don't do it. I was willing to do that, and I think, you know, for my next book, I don't think I'm going to be as willing to do so much. Like I said yes to everything, you know, like from the you know, I did a Zoom with like 3 people in Illinois who like, the guy was like, so how does it feel to be famous? I'm like, what are you talking about? It was so awkward. Like so I said yes to everything, and I think now I'm just not as willing to kind of grind in the way that I grinded for the first book. And I don't think you have to do anything they tell, you know, like the publisher tells you to do. Hopefully Margot will never listen to this, but yeah, I think setting your own terms is actually really important for your own like self-care and longevity as a writer, you know, like being really clear on what's important to you and what you want to do, what you're willing to do.